Uh, the Portland State University senior requirements requires a capstone project, and they basically have sponsors from the community come in, propose a project, the student groups choose which one they want to do, and we were lucky enough to get ours chosen. So there's a group of 6 students, 4 or 5?
Yeah.
4 here, yeah. Andreas and Ken are not here, I guess. But they chose the project, and initially it started off as just, a simple rewrite of the Drizzle client tool, but of course as soon as we got thinking about it, there are a lot more cooler things we can do, thinking of, oh, it would be really cool if we could have like shell typing abilities right inside of the command line tool. And that was just sort of where things got started, but anyways, I guess Max, you want to
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to reiterate the same thing. I was having a bad joke here about Portland not having any drizzle today. I'm sorry you guys couldn't experience that. Some of you talked about it now. Yeah, this is who we are. Andreas, Clark, Ken, Max, Victoria, and David. And we're in the capstone program. Eric did a great job of introducing what that's about. I should say we're also privileged to have such a great opportunity for our capstone. We're a bunch of open source people. We like open source. That's really what we wanted to get out of our capstone. And Eric was he was there as the open source project and provided a really great base for us to work on for our capstone. This is what we're doing. We want to make a really awesome client, and we want to take this opportunity, since we're going to make a client from scratch, to hear from everyone what they'd like to be in this, based on your gripes with old clients, based on what you think could be really cool. If you could just throw away everything that's happened with MySQL client or the Postgres client, and just brainstorm what you'd like to see in the client, what requirements you'd have. That's it. Discussion begin. These are our requirements that we currently have. It's just a pretty short list in terms of depth of what we've identified as the bare minimum of what we're going to target for our basically 5 months of development within the capstone. After that, it'll be an open source project, and it will be an open source project during our development period. So hack away. Hopefully, it'll have some wings of its own. So first of all, I'd like to just point out we're not going to be just supporting Drizzle. It's going to be based on Eric's libdrizzle, which should be able to plug into MySQL, I believe. Is that correct?
And anything that speaks to MySQL or Drizzle protocols.
Yeah. And as well, we're going to try to design everything, if we go the Python route, which is what we're considering as a target language, we will design it around the Python DB API, which is an abstracted layer that allows you to basically plug in different database modules. So then you'll have Postgres, you'll have pretty much any other SQL variant that someone's plugged into Python, which is
most of them.
Yes.
Most of other than Drizzle at the moment.
Uh-huh.
You can fix tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, okay. I'll work on that during the presentation. So, what would you guys like to talk about? What would you,
What are some of the problems with the current client that you hope to solve?
It's their fault a lot. The current client is a little bit broken because it was hacked.
The Drizzle client.
Yeah, the Drizzle client.
It mostly works. It just was it was ported to use the new protocol library, so there's a few things in there that are still sketchy, but we've sort of, if it fixed a serious bug, but, keeping it on hold until, we got to a real rewrite. But as far as feature sets go, there's, besides just issuing SQL queries and getting a couple different formatted outputs and having a, different formatter for output, there's not a whole lot of features in there. One of the features that I think originally came from you was the piping ability.
Yeah, because like in the MySQL command line client, which is which the Drizzle one is derived from, you can issue the \pager command to set ostensibly a pager so that you can look at scroll through output, which is your weird hacky way to be able to pipe things through anything you want to. So you set pager to pipe grep, pipe awk, pipe whatever, but then that's just sort of a generic global thing, so you like set it, and then you run your commands, and they'll all run through that until you unset the pager. And I don't know about other people, but that's not really the way I normally work with anything. You know, there seems to be a way that pipelining works in the world in general that always felt like it could be better. But then you run into questions of, you know, what is it that what are you gonna feed into that pipeline? You know, I mean, do you want to be able to tell it to, you know, because when we normally output database results, they're like formatted with little things because the whole idea came up, you know, when we needed to have like vertical bars and stuff, you know, separating columns, and that's maybe not the best format to pipe into a pipeline so that something like grep and awk can handle it, but I don't know. It's just, you know, I don't know.
So you guys don't have like CSV output?
Well, you could, I mean, you could do like in bash, you know, you could do like, you know, drizzle, query, pipe, whatever, and you could tell it to spit out in some other format. But if you're actually in the command line client and the command line interface of the command line client were to support pipelining, then do you really want to just be pipelining that with all of the graphical characters that it would have done, or, you know, that's just me rambling, so.
So do you have the ability like to change your format? Like say,
Yeah.
okay, like
That's
I don't
what I'm
want this
asking.
character here. It's easier for me to process this data
If you do this,
Tab separate.
have some other
Yeah.
character, a funny character there, or I want it in binary.
There's really
Yeah.
no abstraction for a pager at all in the current client. So
Yeah,
there's
it's
really
just
no.
the one.
Yeah, that's all there really has ever been. So some kind of an abstraction around the pager to be able to output anything instead of just, you know, being able to pass something like here's the structure, now please process this in whatever, XML, you know, lengthwise, whether or not it should be escaping binary stuff, you name it. Those should all be options, and that should just be something that should have been done. So.
Any thoughts around like a scripting language to embed in?
Well, it's gonna, if it's written in Python, it will be a scripting language essentially.
Will you be able to treat the query result as an object in the scripting language? So you can build a loop construct at the command line interface to handle the results that do something, launch other queries or processes from it.
That would be really interesting. I think that currently in our design, we're trying to avoid doing unnecessary parsing on the command line if we can manage it. I think that a piping system would, by nature, be an iterative thing. You get a list of results, and you
Yes, but continue.
you get like a list of results, and those would be passed to or streamed to another node that would do
I'd
processing.
really like the ability to be able to get the functionality of a cursor without using sort of procedure. Just at the CLI, create my cursor, if you will, or for loop on the fly, run my result, and for each row in result or column or whatever, do something with it at the CLI before seeing the output. Or perhaps to take an action in the database like an update based on the result set.
So, how are you imagining that this works instead of just having a semicolon at the end of the command, having like a semicolon pipe, and then straight up Unix commands, or some drizzle specific stuff that would
Why
get run?
not, sorry to continue, but why not have some other terminator after your SQL and follow that with Python that you can literally just embed, and it will say, well, take the result of this SQL query, and then it's an object that you execute within this Python code.
I mean, just something as far as conceptually to understand about like where the main database will go long term is that MySQL implemented something called delimiter within the 5.0 series. The problem with delimiter is that it continues the whole Bobby Tables problem of having the database like be able to take like here's 5 queries, figure it out on your own. Oops, what? You didn't remember to escape that shit? Sorry about that. You suck. That stuff is gone. Drizzle doesn't act. Drizzle takes each given execution period and executes on that, so it doesn't actually anymore try to do the whole like multi-statement stuff directly in the Lex anymore. Yeah, that's just dumb. So the thing though is that you should be thinking about this. If you're thinking about delimiters, we're expecting a full statement to be passed by. So if there's any delimiter work that needs to be done, like semicolon or whatever else, you need to be doing that work directly in the client, because we're not
Yeah,
going to be
right.
accepting.
And that's what I meant. Have a delimiter, there's the end, the SQL, and whatever after that doesn't get passed to the server, but is left for the CLI to process.
I don't see why you should. Yeah. Okay. You could have a mandate semicolon or
Yeah.
something.
Does the current MySQL client allow you to have like just pass a string on the command line? It's like here's the query, just dump the output to stand it out.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and that should definitely be kept.
Oh, it's
or
gonna be
something like
echo query pipe CLI.
Right.
We're gonna design it so it's batch processing friendly as well.
So if you stick with Python, then you've also given the Windows client users something to actually program with.
Yeah.
LibDrizzle currently, to my knowledge, doesn't have a Windows port, but it's close.
I've got a half Windows port on my Windows desktop machine that's which is a half port because I don't really know all that much about Windows. And so I'm having to learn huge amounts of information about Windows as I try and do the port, which is exciting. And my methodology for that is I built a Visual Studio file with all the files in it and just told it to compile it, and I get like 100,000 errors and warnings and trying to figure out why it can't find some header, which then involves Googling why doesn't Windows have standard int, and discovering that they have decided to, ignore C99 altogether. Even though it is 2009, 10 years later, they apparently still don't think it's important to have that. So, but yeah, so there's that. That is, if any time actually ever gets spent on that, and especially if I can find somebody who's actually like a Windows programmer who cares, then who could help do that more sensibly than that.
Patrick's doing memcached and libmemcached right now. We could
Padrag or Patrick? Patrick. Great.
Tangent, Austin Appleby. That's who's gotten some stuff working for me before.
Great.
So
Yeah, so we should chat with it because I've got we've got the structure in we did the ugliness that we needed to do in the tree to support putting in the stuff. So it's just a matter of actually going in and putting in the ifdefs in one or two places.
So we'll be learning.
20 to 1,000 places.
Well, we actually, so for most of it, what we've actually been trying to do is do some of that if-defing at the build level. So there's not if-defs throughout the code, but there's like alternate, so there's a file that gets built if you're on Windows that doesn't get built if you're in things. So when you're reading the code, it's, and then abstracting those pieces to be very, very small.
So like call a function and from one file without the ifdefs in it, like, oh, if it was compiled on Windows, the object's actually in that file, otherwise, same operating systems here.
Just write in C#, then you won't have to do anything.
I tried to convince Brian just yesterday that we needed to rewrite Drizzle in C#, and
and then somebody suggested Go.
Because then you can run the EXEs right on Linux.
It would be really fast.
So,
which could get us into a discussion about
Richard Stallman would come and beat all of our ass.
Oh gosh.
not to digress too much, but has anybody seen Vala? Is it from
Vala is
Vala?
really exciting.
It's actually really cool. Like it's, I don't know if it, I just noticed it the other day. It's a C# and Java like language, but it compiles directly, so it doesn't go to a virtual machine or anything like that. But it gives you all of that sort of slightly higher level, like type safety-ish type goo, which is really interesting. And then it actually at the moment compiles down to C, and then you compile it. But so you're actually
Toy Poodle, Saint Bernard.
yeah. Yeah. Just saying. It's an interesting project that I think.
So last night you guys brought up maybe linking this into Postgres. So have you looked at that at all? Like, do you have some like low-hanging fruit, like that, some tasks we could delegate out?
Postgres has a very established, and several, I think more than one very established Python DB API modules. So what? I mean,
you're not a real Python programmer unless you've written your own Postgres DB API.
Okay. So I don't think there's much that Postgres needs to do to be, included if we're going to be writing things the right way, which I think is abstract.
So did you pick one?
Did we pick? Oh, not yet. No,
Yeah.
that is
Actually, getting back to some of the basic questions, like who here would be offended by the use of Python for such a tool?
Awesome.
I think that's decided.
So here's something more controversial: Python 2 or Python 3?
I've already given my
I'm still
mailing
going to
list.
say to something just
Do
because
something.
the distribution support is so lacking. You don't want to make Drizzle that much harder to install.
Okay.
What doesn't have Python 3 at this point?
Anything.
Anything?
Ubuntu
Yeah,
has it as
it's
a optional.
Ubuntu is the only distro right now. I don't know about Gentoo, but like of the, like Debian SID doesn't even have Python 3.
Does Microsoft actually put Python on like even their Windows server stuff or at all? Or
I don't know
anything?
if Microsoft does, but most of the vendors, like if I had left Windows on this ThinkPad, it had Python installed on it. Yeah, because a lot, like most of the ThinkPad utilities that IBM distributes with the ThinkPads are written in Python.
I've never
So-
seen it on a Dell.
What's that?
I've never seen it on a Dell.
No.
I know it's bundled with OS X as well.
Yeah.
It's basically
So
Perl
it's-
version.
Yeah, and in the Python installer on Windows is a nicely integrated, like MSI, installs pretty nicely. So it's a one double click you've got. If you don't already have Python on your Windows machine, it's really, the Python guys have kept up pretty nicely with being friendly to the Windows world.
That's just the 2 branch that has the MSI.
I think 3 branch has the MSI too.
Anyone know how difficult it is to upgrade Python from 2.x to 3 on CentOS or Red Hat?
Well, you're gonna break everything, basically.
That's what
Oh, no, wait. You said upgrade.
Install them in
You can
parallel.
install them in parallel.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, but then it's a separate thing. So yeah, I think that, I think you're, because I hear you, but I think it winds up being stuck on 2 just because it's, when you think about the Red Hat systems, it's going to be a while before you're good with Python 3 on like a RHEL box. I don't even know if it's going to go into RHEL. RHEL 6 isn't even released yet,
No.
right? That's the next one. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's not in RHEL 6.
well, the other argument is how long is it gonna take for Drizzle to be in a RHEL distribution.
That's true.
So,
But it's weird because even though if you installed Python as a Python 3 as a thing, it actually, because of the way Python is structured, it wouldn't break your system.
Mhm.
But a lot of people will be reluctant to, like if it's Python or Perl or like the languages, people get really skittish with installing different versions of those on their server. Like really, like they just won't, like because they're not sure that they know that it's not going to break anything, so they just won't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you make the sysadmins have to install a language like that, you're going to put up a barrier against people installing Drizzle
I
Yeah.
get
before it's
Yeah.
on any distributions.
Yeah, and the one difference there is like people may go through the hoops to install Drizzle because that's what they want. Like they don't necessarily want Python 3, they want Drizzle. And you know, if it's really just a dependency, it's not the thing that you want. So there's a slight difference there.
Yeah, and it would be the same thing if it was Python 2 if Python 2 wasn't everywhere, like other than on some Windows machines. But I think the Windows people are a little bit more, typically more used to having to install
And it's not a system dependency.
Right.
Your laptop isn't going to die if you upgrade from Python 2.7 to 3.
Yeah, because it's not an integral part. Whereas like on Red Hat, Yum is written in Python, so you might be freaking out that you might install a package and destroy your system's ability to install packages, and that actually won't happen, but you may not know that that's not going to happen, and you're not even going to bother to find out.
So not to change the subject, but
Yeah.
are there still intentions of rolling in the other client programs into this, such as like MySQL dump or?
Well,
Yeah, to some degree. Probably not the test thing. That should be sort of broken out. But
at some
at
point that
least
should die.
for the Drizzle tools, all we really have are
The old one.
Drizzle Slat, which could be integrated in probably because that's really just.
Doing a multi-threaded application in.
Well, we could do it for.
Yeah, we ran into that problem before. The problem is fork processes can't actually generate nearly the load that the threaded model runs.
Well,
Yeah, it was in the early version of it to do both forks and threads, and we found out actually that design-wise you can't generate the traffic.
Okay. That's surprising on Linux since there's such heavyweight threads.
So that was initially because initially it actually supported both, and we were kind of surprised when the outcome was like, nope, actually threads are actually better than forks.
So maybe the Slat tool, but at least the ping and shutdown have already been integrated.
Ping and shutdown have already been. So if MySQL admin's gone, the equivalent of
Yeah.
the admin tool is gone.
Probably dump
dump, and then the question
Dump
is,
and import.
The simple dump could be, but then there's also probably going to be another set of tools based on the replication protocols, which may or may not be integrated. I'm not sure how that'll look. But the replication, like bulk inserting, will be more efficient than reading from like a plain text file and parsing and using an SQL statement.
so it'll just be the protobuf things.
Yeah,
And the nice thing is, if we do decide to do that in this client, is protobuf also, Python is one of the 3 supported languages from
Well
Google
supported.
for protobuf. So
The-
it could be written. I'm not saying that's a high priority right now, but it's physically like it
Yeah.
wouldn't be a weird thing to do.
Yeah, the thing though is that depending on like where tools go, if a tool was going to replace the main one, it should probably go back actually in the server package and not be a separate project.
I think packaging wise, we should package it in with it, but I don't think it should necessarily live inside.
We've had so much problems with having libdrizzle outside of actually the main product, of all like the concurrency stuff of like testing and all this other stuff, that I would think long term. I mean, even at this point, I still wonder if we should move libdrizzle back in the server, just due to some of the recent problems, even trying to get like getting testing to work on the main servers go. It's been like an open question in my mind, like if this was even a good idea.
But I still think that the reason for that is that Eric and I have specifically not been trying to care about, like, that hasn't been a priority of worrying about it. Like, so one of the
Yeah.
reasons there's been problems is that like we specifically said we're not going to care about making that a priority. And I think that can be much cleaner.
And now that we are starting
less
to
painful.
care, yeah, it's going to be.
Yeah. If it continues to be careful now that we're paying attention to it,
Yeah.
then yeah, I'll be interested to see once we're actually doing the things that one needs to do to have that be appropriate.
I would say like the official releases, we should bundle whatever's in the other projects in, so it's
Yeah.
all one package,
Yeah.
and they optionally install if they're not already installed. But especially with this tool, if we're looking at doing it generic, so all these other DBs could use it, it would be like, oh, install Drizzle just to get this thing that
Yeah.
I want to use with Postgres.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing also to think about also with this is that I mean, some of the people who are if we look at where Drizzle is being targeted at, it's like the BlitzDB or the InfiniDB guys. There's a good case that Drizzle will be the kernel that's actually in the product, but you'll never actually see the word Drizzle involved. Like the binary that gets installed will be X number of companies' binary. So the end tool, whether the end tool has a Drizzle name on it or not, may not necessarily matter. I mean, the whole goal is that the different storage engine vendors can actually release database products that happen to use the Drizzle microkernel, but it itself, is it Drizzle? Well, it's all of their pieces put together, and that's something that is. I mean, Drizzle is more of well, we have an end result database. We target more as being a framework for somebody else building something. So those companies that are building something around it, InfiniDB will be called InfiniDB. The fact that there's a Drizzle microkernel underneath it is.
And that's sort of the nice thing that I like about what these guys are talking about with the client is that if it's sort of a general thing, then and heck, maybe it's not even called Drizzle at the end of the day. Maybe it's just this database client. And when people ask, well, how do you connect to Drizzle? We say you use this generic database. You use this database client here, which is not necessarily And so then it's just sort of like Bash, right? Like it's like a database shell. Not necessarily for a database,
Bingo. I think that's
That's what we want to mirror. We want to. I mean, ideologically, we think that the micro, that the modularity approach is great. So we want to mirror that with our design.
Yeah.
And have like a simple configuration of like by default call yourself, this database if you want. So if people actually want.
Or
to
if you install it, do the Unix symlinking trick so that you can install a thing that's called Drizzle, and if argv0 equals Drizzle, then default the port to 4427. If argv0 equals MySQL, call it 3306 or whatever, so that it could. Or I don't know, that's the right thing, but
I mean, the funny
because you want to make it easy for somebody to just fire it. You don't want to have somebody to have to type 17 things on the command line because then people won't use it.
I mean, the historical thing which is funny about this is that the original tool set that's inside that MySQL adopted were not MySQL tools in the first place. In fact, the headers even still show that in their history. They were written by Clark, one of the Russians at the time, and they were supposed to be generic tools that were used for multiple databases. It's just that at the time, Monty pulled them into the tree and they became the MySQL tree after they've been renamed. So the idea of going back to a generic set of tools that any database can reuse You know, that would be the nice thing, not to actually have to have every database have its own set of tools.
And that becomes sort of like from the Oracle people's world, you know, the people like the GUIs, you know, Toad sort of became huge for that, and then you've got, you know, Toad, which is a tool for Oracle application developers that now you can use to connect to MySQL.
That's an awful name.
Isn't it?
Toad.
But now it's
Don't
not.
use that name.
But now it's like, but now it's a generic, like, you know, it's a thing that a certain set of DBAs use to connect to whatever database they're interacting with, because it's a generic database tool. It just happened that it came from the Oracle background.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. It's like, you know, inside Drizzle, the, you know, configure / dash dash, you know, binary name thing should be, it produces whatever the result. So Toro is doing something with BlitzDB, the end binary name should be BlitzDB. Instead of generic tools that they can be downloaded and used for that, you know, I don't know that the vendors are really going to care that they have to also apply BlitzDB as command line tool. You know, in fact, I suspect that they would rather that a set of common tools exist so the end user doesn't actually have to know, hey, by the way, this particular database is tools.
Yeah, yeah. I think people will like that.
So back to MySQL dump just for a minute. And this stuff is actually really obvious, but I'm sorry. It's incredibly important. It has 150 command line switches, and it's a disaster.
Yes.
and it begs to be written in Python.
Yeah.
I think.
So once we have this framework, we're obviously not going to get all this done in our capstone term, but if we can design a framework that is usable for everyone, it is at least 99 or 90% there, you know, hopefully this will crack open open Pandora's box for what, you know, people will do to re-implement their favorite tools in Python.
Feature request that may be way outside of what you guys want to do. The Postgres client is awesome because it has a pager integrated intelligently. Is there any chance that you guys could have something similar?
Yeah.
Because that drives me nuts with MySQL.
If we have a flexible pipe, are you talking about automatic paging or are you talking about
Yeah,
Yes.
like the defaults to showing you the stuff through the paging.
When
Yeah.
it's more than a page.
Then
Yeah.
I get that.
One line comes up in less.
I get that. It checks the length of the result, how long it will be displayed. Yeah, I mean, that's totally possible if we have, for instance, that node-based system, because you have an output, class or module that can intelligently deal with that based on how high level the input it actually gets that it's supposed to, display. I think that's totally, hackable.
But at a higher level, though, I mean, like MySQL obviously can support that, but having the same default is
Yeah.
the key.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the cool things is if we have this modular sort of associated but less associated morass of plugins and things that can kind of integrate into this client, you could have like a config file or that builds your own, Drizzle client based off of these pieces. That's the same default, but people can then, add little bits and syncs and processing things in the middle.
They like the default behavior of MySQL where it just spits everything out.
Yeah.
When 100 megs of crap goes by.
Comments out pager.py.
Yeah. And you're SSH'd in, so like hitting Control-C is still on the delay because you're buffered, and so
You
you're
should
like,
definitely, you should definitely set up some pathological defaults for people to use. That's a good idea.
Help will quit. So in terms of in terms of sexy shells, I don't know what your favorite shell is. Mine is probably IPython because it's ridiculous. It has like color output and like tab completion for Python syntax and everything. And hopefully, and it'll like transparently run shell commands. You can just type in ls and it'll do what you expect. Hopefully, once we've got the same base, you can start plugging in a really cool, functional shell that will work with.
Yeah.
Pretty much
Which would be
anything
cool.
you can
Because
imagine.
that's one of the things that 10 years ago, like, having just been using the Sybase ISQL command line client for a while, like the MySQL command line client was really exciting because it had command line history and, tab completion, and that was really sexy. But then other shells have become more rich since then, and the MySQL command line client has not
Yes.
changed. So it would be great to sort of become a little bit more state of the art with how people expect their stuff to.
Something I don't see up here is the show command, as far as mapping show command. Like, creation of new show commands should be occurring in the client side, not actually show commands are just an abstraction layer to the what's actually the information schema. So one thing to be thinking about is like, how can you take things like show and put some kind of a simple parser in there to actually implement the show command so that they should not be in the database.
Generically, like, and not just for show, but just a generic command plugin system-y type of thing. However that works, whether it's, I don't know, first token with no white space from the thing, or whether you've got a delimiter, however you figured that out. But because that also would get back to the earlier question of if you've got a query and you pipe it to something, if you could pipe it to a command that's been written, and those are easy to write as little plugins to the thing, then whoop.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking of, just as a simple example, would be you do like select blah from blah, and your CSV output thing would be, let's just say an arrow is our delimiter right now. You'd be like, you could have like a CSV output sync, and you'd use, you'd put in a delimiter, and then you'd pipe that to a file, blah blah blah. I think that that excites me in terms of functionality.
Yeah,
and
then if CSV and file are each just essentially command plugins that have been implemented somewhere, sort of like a standard. There's a standard library of command plugins, but they're just as easy. They're first-class citizens for somebody to write a new whatever that thing is.
Yeah,
that would be really cool.
On the topic of the show commands, one thing that really irks me and I would love to see in the client would be the ability to show a process list, for instance, that's perhaps a bit long, maybe multiple pages, but have a hotkey or some kind of command where we can cycle through the columns and sort by those columns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would like to get database names in order alphabetically, so everybody's grouped together, or execution time all grouped together
from the information
or
schema.
state.
Yeah.
See, from the information
Well, that's
schema,
all-
yeah.
oh, yeah,
I mean, that's simple. I mean, since all that data is now available as
That's right.
tables, it's just a matter of when you rewrite the show command, putting in, I'd like a roll up on this particular pieces or whatever.
So the data in the information schema, all those different tables, that you were proposing to not have to use show commands that are parsed by the server. Does that mean there is a while of a protocol to query that information without it bypassing the parser?
Oh, well, I mean, all that information, all that, a show command really is internally just a rewrite to an actual select command. That's all it is,
Right.
even inside the database. So what I'm suggesting is we should take that rewrite stuff and actually throw it out of the database and put it actually in the client.
Okay, so
And-
the client would be passing the select, which is then the
Where the
server?
client,
Okay.
where the client will show what those select statements are.
Like anyway.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
a
So
debug or
So
something.
Postgres
Yeah.
has like a
PSQL
dash
has-
E flag, and so then as you're anytime you're doing any kind of show command or any of your backslash commands, it'll spit out what the SQL statement was. It's really useful.
I was hoping you were suggesting that it even avoid the need for the server to parse the show statement or the select statement.
Well, the problem is that then you get into we're implementing something other than SQL,
Right.
which I'm not against doing, but I haven't seen anything so far that really looks better than.
Although
I'm open to
eventually,
hearing about it.
if we do get a secondary protocol, so if the client is responsible for rewriting these things, and we do at some point get a secondary protocol that even accepts, my dream of having the client be able to construct protobuf messages that would represent the post-parsed state of something, then you could then have the show command, instead of generating SQL, generate a protobuf message and send it into the secondary protocol channel, if that's ever there. But yeah, I think for now, that's
clearly
just
that would be a jump from the Python DB API to something that's like a superclass of that would be Drizzle specific.
Do you envision that being similar to the NDB API, but in protobuf?
possibly, yeah. There's the thought of having some ability to do your sort of lower level things that have all that construction happen client side, so that my eventual feasibility is still, I think, quite a ways off, but being able to do some amount of essentially pre-parsed statements, so you're not even passing, so that the server doesn't have to do the work of parsing, which in a really high concurrency environment.
Well, one thing that we can sort of getting into the prepared statements API and how we're replacing that is if we can, instead of re-implementing the entire parser inside of the client tool, to be able to say, hey, here's a query, give me back the abstract syntax tree for that parse query, let me cache that, and then every time you want to, like, say if you're running like a top type program, don't send the SQL in every time, send the abstract syntax tree in, because, you know, that's not going to change. And you can cache those things and work out some system for that, but
we don't really have any. The problem is we don't have any form of serialized abstract.
Oh,
We
yeah,
have
no,
abstract-
yeah.
it's a ways out.
This is
but
all like
that's
wet
a
dream
little-
stuff in the future, yeah.
Well, then that would be a good way to do it. So basically, avoid rewriting the parser and
The only thing we have
client.
abstract,
I'm
only
not
thing we have
typing that.
abstract language for at this point is updates, inserts, and DDL operations. So you
Yeah.
could bypass to get access to that, because those are all serializable, but
select.
selectively
But-
not.
but
So
there
it's a
were-
little more difficult.
But from a you know, from a coding perspective, if the client is responsible for translating show commands into information schema things, then there will probably want to be some sort of dialect provider for each because, you know, the information schema, I mean, it's supposed to be standard, of course, but it's not. So, you know, those queries will be different, you know, for different databases, and, you know, there would want to be some sort of
The one thing though is that's
standard.
well.
they're pretty standard.
No,
but-
they're standard.
Oh, yeah, yeah, no,
It's ANSI. I mean, you have to have certain things in your information schema. Your system catalogs are entirely another story.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that, well, there's two problems here that I would be careful about. One, the standard does define a lot of things as far as like catalog information, like naming schema, how that's supposed to be done, but it is not a full descriptive capability. Like process list, by the way, like accessing process list stuff is not actually in the standard. Index components are not in the standard. So none of that stuff's in the standard. And one thing that has been a black hole of many projects who have tried to like create like a interface to hide that stuff from there's been a number of projects that have tried to hide that. You know, Perl's DVD tried it, Java tried it a little bit. No one has successfully accomplished that yet. So as far as like pits to go, one pit would be to try to, in the first pass, come up with an abstraction layer around that particular side of information. I would be a little weary of going in that direction. As well, there's a lot of dead littered on that road right now.
So we should probably just target Drizzle for now and say, hey, if you actually care, you should.
What I would do is target. My suggestion would be is I would actually target doing the show, but make it so that the end user or whomever can actually modify those show commands, so that like if somebody says, hey, by the way, this show process list should exist on Postgres or Firebird or you name it, somebody has a modular enough way they go, let's go in here and find, yep, that's where I need to write the query right in there. That's what I do, and then it'll return.
I don't see how it's different from abstracting, which is leaving blanks for your.
But that's
But
doing the blanks yourself.
basically
That's
it's
try getting
essentially-
it yourself.
having a
Yeah,
config
sending out a
file.
template, yeah.
Having a config file per database that you're talking to. So like if you're talking to MySQL, use this set of mappings. If you're talking to Drizzle, use this set of mappings, and just keep those in separate config files.
Providing that information from Postgres is trivial. I mean, it's like, it would be so easy for us to give you that.
Commands talk to the system catalog or any information schema? I think it talks to the catalogs, right? Like PG catalog.
Yeah,
So
I
it
mean,
ignores the
depends.
standards and talks to like.
It was probably done
reviews and
beforehand.
stuff.
But just the
assume.
SQL, I mean, but
Right, the
I was talking
SQL
about
itself.
putting in the SQL itself, yeah.
Right, right.
But PG has an information schema that could be queried, and that's even more stable. So
Right. But it also
that's
doesn't have
one.
all the information you might.
No, it doesn't.
want.
But the issue is like just implementing the show commands like from a end user perspective, like whether it would be
You could
useful
write-
or
yeah,
not,
you
not
could write
whether it's
queries.
non-conforming.
Yeah.
So
The question if the query is useful or not is different. Like what it's showing you back from the data itself is for the user to decide really.
But the nice thing about it is if you set up a set of templates, then
Yeah, you
screw
should be
it.
able to drop in more show commands.
Yeah.
Yep. Oops.
in terms of core functionality, what would you like to see come out of this? What are your bare minimum requirements?
Actually, if you do want to just kind of scroll through the wiki and
Yeah.
see like what's starred,
Sure.
and like if that's like and
Yeah.
what's not starred, and see what's a good idea or not.
So I'd like to toss out that I think that the maintaining the simple ability to type whatever, you know, whatever host name is, like whatever the connect string is, but a simple, you know, very short command to connect to whatever it is that you're connecting to, and issue a single select statement and have that display sensibly and then quit out of the client without having to know anything about more, like making that sure that simple case still works.
Absolutely.
As long as that's like, and yeah, that's a can't, you know.
That's
Yeah.
Like
a
I can't
must-have.
abstract and
list
be.
of tables, list of databases.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
Absolutely.
So what's the legend, the stars, and the
Oh,
green and blue
sorry.
dots?
Yeah. Stars are must have and sort of.
Cool.
Yeah.
A
Okay.
good object tab completion.
Yeah.
That is like the golden child.
We do want tab completion. It's
Those queries themselves have a lot to do with the show stuff too. So I don't know if
Yeah.
kill two birds there or not.
And have it be able to easily be turned off. When I'm on a server with tens of thousands,
Yeah, those
Yeah.
queries are rarely optimized.
Toggleable.
Toggleable after you hit.
or even
tab
better,
accident.
Yes. Well, every time you hit it twice, it goes, are you sure?
yeah.
I still
Honestly,
don't know how many there are.
every server that I'm on, one of the first things that I do, if it on many servers, is like tab completion in MySQL sucks. I've never found it useful. Yeah, I have no hope for it ever being useful, particularly because of all the different engines involved. I just assume that it won't.
So
Yeah.
one thing that could improve it is having the tab completion be context aware. So if you're, the next word should be a SQL command, it isn't going to propose you fill it in with a table or a column name.
Right.
Mhm.
yeah. And
I've never got
that's
tabs,
should be
which
pretty
is really
simple.
useful either, so.
I think that there are probably Python modules that get us most of the way there. We'll just be integrating, hopefully what somebody else has already built, which is an abstract syntax tree based, context aware tab completer and syntax highlighter. Hopefully we can just plug that in without having to reinvent the wheel.
Somebody has to have written that.
Oh yeah, I mean look at IPython. This is a Python based tool that does all this crap already.
Yeah.
It might be interesting, by the way, two thoughts here was, one is that the actual SQL parser we have is actually getting fairly close to where it could be abstracted out as a library of its own, so you could actually just use our actual Bison parser. Second thing would be is write one up in Antler, because then we could take that and throw out the Bison one and actually use the Antler one instead.
The Antler ones are pretty much already written too, and we can just tweak one that's more appropriate for Drizzles.
Because performance-wise, the few
uh,
times we've seen it,
actually-
Antler would outperform the shit out of
But
Bison.
Antler has annoying dependencies for runtime.
Does it, for build time, it
It's
has
build
Java.
time dependent.
No, for runtime too.
To
Really?
be frank,
Yeah.
I don't expect us
It has
to
a runtime library.
I don't expect us to get to syntax highlighting within our 5-month period. I think that we'll
Well,
have
yeah, it
we
spits
can at
out
least
everything.
get started
Antler
on it,
doesn't. It says
or
we'll use
put it
this
in
library.
as a placeholder or design around it.
Yeah.
But really, what we need to get done to satisfy the requirements of our capstone and Eric, and our time limit is to have something that's functioning and meets the bare minimum. And within that framework, we need to make it
And,
possible to do
and
it.
really have it to a point so, hopefully some of you guys continue hacking on it, but have it to a point where if all you guys dropped off the face of the planet, like it's in a maintainable state that we can continue development. So
Yeah.
having like the nice framework and docs and all that. So
I'm not going to abandon it. I'm on Freenode. You can yell at me when something is broken.
Everybody eventually gets bored with any open source project and wants to move
Chrome
on.
code.
So
Yeah.
part of the longevity of it is to make sure that like it is possible for someone to actually continue it on.
I think that the modularity and going with Python, the hope is to be able to make it easy for people to step in and be like, okay, I want to make it do this now, or step up and extend.
Yeah.
I would definitely like to suggest, having done many years of Python programming myself, I guess a piece of advice is a lot of the Python tends to tend towards abstracting things to the nth degree, so that like you can actually compose anything you want to, but you then have gotten back to the point where you have to actually understand like everything about the system to grok the plugin system, because it's like it's not a plugin. You write a provider generator that generates the plugin interface GUI, which then is also
So you're saying it's Java? No,
right, yeah,
I've seen that.
like I love SQL Alchemy, and at the same time, like writing providers for the insides of SQL Alchemy is like, wait, I have to write a what? And that thing wants to return a what?
Yeah.
I recognize that the end result is that I only had to write 3 lines of code, but I couldn't figure out which 3 lines they were for like a
Took you
year.
3 weeks to figure out what I'm trying to write.
Exactly. So yeah.
I was thinking for the plugin system, you know, it would just be write a Python module with like some predefined objects that you can include, and say here's the iterator interface for rows coming in and rows going out, and just do
Yeah.
whatever you want. So make it really simple.
Yeah.
So people don't need anything more besides, you know, basic Python.
Yeah.
So one thing I'm wondering about with doing this in Python, I'm not familiar with the Python language myself, I don't use it. Is there going to be, suppose you have a lot of work that needs to be done, not just simple usability where I hop on the server, I need to run a few commands and I'm done. You know, suppose I need to write, you know, some kind of application that's going to use the hell out of this thing. Are we going to run into problems where it's less efficient than if it was written in something else like C?
That came up on the mailing list, and I think general consensus was, you know, Python's great for the interactive and most things, and if you find that it isn't, then you would have to do C or C++.
Yeah. Or that those things are things that rather than writing an app that shells out to the command line client, that just using, you know, either writing a thing that isn't related to this to do like, you know, Java or Python or C or whatever, like that's actually, like you said, like if you're writing a thing that's actually an application, then bypassing interfacing with the command line client and actually just using one of the programming language libraries to do that is more likely going to be maintainable in
Some
the
stuff
long
also
run.
just highlights deficiencies in the servers as far as like having better bulk API loaders and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which is really a case of where it really shouldn't be the client's responsibility to be this. It really should be the server actually should be doing a better bulk than what it actually is doing.
Or there should be better provided tools so that you're not having to write as many complex applications for doing administrative and management type tasks. Since those are so repeatable, like most people have the same issues over and over again. Which is
But for use case specific things, and you should expect people to be able to use your shell client to batch, process and shell script effectively. I think that Python is used in tons of cases with the DB API to do real work on databases, and it should be very little bit slower than that, working with that. So it shouldn't make a big deal if Python, in terms of whether Python is fast enough for you, I don't think it'll be that much.
I mean, what would be the difference if you're using the command line client in your shell and you're running bash scripts over that command line client? What's the real performance going to be between if it's written in Python or C?
Yeah.
Like you're still running it in bash and repeatedly. So I've done that, and it's never as good as if I were to just connect directly to the database and actually start writing an application. Like if it's that level of complexity.
But you should be able to do that and have it. I think that even with this, you should be able to just do it in a bash script and have it work.
The performance,
and the performance implications
running
is
it
okay with you.
It should be acceptable,
Yeah.
but it shouldn't be like, you shouldn't be expecting,
And also,
the best thing in the world.
if the modules are pure Python originally, and we say like this is a really popular module, but it's just not performing because it needs to do a heavy computation or it needs to do something that Python isn't that fast at, we can easily rewrite that module in C++, and that's really easy to link into a Python module. So sort of just replace it.
As part of the
That's pretty
standard
much
library.
what a like bizarre version control system, like they wrote it all in Python. They're like, hey, this really sucks right here. They're slowing everything down. Let's rewrite that, part in C++, and now like it's faster.
Yeah.
Isn't PyObject is pretty easy to use?
Yeah.
So
Oh yeah, do
for
you guys have a
example,
repo?
instead of
It'll be on Launchpad soon.
instead of using bash to do your loop and processing control and all that, what I was suggesting earlier that I think that people thought was a good idea is to be able to do all that directly in the CLI in Python. That takes your bash overhead out of the picture.
Yeah.
It's still not going to be as good performance as if you wrote an application.
Inside the Drizzle client
Yes,
itself.
inside the Drizzle client.
Yeah. So
Well, there is a I know there's a SQL loop command somewhere out there that I've seen before.
Yeah, but
I don't know if
imagine being able to in the CLI directly write quick little scripts in Python.
Okay,
that
and
will
then pass it
work
on.
with the SQL query at the same
Well,
time, instead of having to do it from bash,
And back and forth.
passing it back and forth, and
Well, you definitely reduce overhead, so
Right.
that would be.
It's totally possible. It'll just require a little cleverness in the in the parsing side of things.
In terms of the pipes, and I think you referred to them as nodes, different elements of them, why must they all be in Python, as opposed to say Perl or PHP or?
Then you have to load something else.
Well, if you can
pass it out.
But on the command line, you can pipe anything.
Yeah,
It's
so on the
just-
command
you
line,
shouldn't break
I'm
that.
used to being able to pipe anything into anything into anything.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
just the native pipeline will be a bunch of Python modules,
Okay.
and there'll be a module that says fork and run this bash command or run this shell command and pipe it out of
So
there and read the
in the
input.
client itself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you looking for this?
There will be two different.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. There'll be
Yeah.
two
Yes.
different things you can do. One is piped
Yeah.
in external, and one is.
And then there's also the possibility, just as you think about it, of, because I think IPython does a good job of this, of having an optimized case where it does a name lookup in its internal command system, doesn't find the internal command, and if it doesn't, it tries to shell. Yeah, like so you're in Python here, you do ls. ls isn't a Python thing, but it sure is a shell command, so it'll do the.
That's a great point. So
Yeah.
we can just do this.
You do that, and if it can't find what unique is, then it tries it in the shell. If it can't find it there, then it throws an error.
The problem is if you're an admin, that can be dangerous.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but it's like it is sort of like what the path.
You could have like a blacklist of like,
Yeah.
don't try to guess this command.
And have a which command.
Oh yeah, so you
Yeah.
can see if it's
Yeah.
actually internal or not.
Yeah.
It would be really nice to be able to take your result set as some kind of object or array and actually send it to another script for
Exactly.
processing. I really like that idea. You know, I need to get a list of all these users that are doing something, or a list of all these stable names, and then I need to do a bunch of shit with it. So I'm gonna
Horrible regex or something.
yeah, I need to do something terrible. So I want to take that result set and just send it right to my program, which is expecting it as argument or something.
One thing you could do that would be absolutely bizarre with a Python-based thing would be like import my script, and then you could like call your Python if we're using Devon's idea of Python scripting within the shell, you could call your actual script's function.
Source your script
Yeah,
in.
my
or
script.
something.
You can call
Yeah,
it
yeah,
like class function.
That's neat, yeah.
Exactly.
That would be
Yeah.
bizarre,
That is
but
pretty cool, actually.
yeah.
Why not?
It could be pretty cool, yeah.
It would be nice if it was like a pigeon language where you could like really easily run, SQL with your Python
Yeah.
code.
Well, and one of the nice things about potentially about some of the parsing things is if you, because like with this, if it's the beginning of a new command, there's only 3 or 4 things that you've got to see if it is like keywords, and the rest of them you can so you don't have to do anything weird or funky. You know that if somebody types my script at the beginning of it, not a SQL command. You're already in your world where you're doing that, and that's it's sort of nice about SQL only having like really
But do we
6
really-
reserved words that can show up at the beginning of the line.
But do we really want to like not formalize our syntax so it's impossible for you to be like import select and then have everything? Well, that worked.
Uh-oh.
And then having that breaking things. I mean, there's a great example.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So maybe you want something syntactical, like, because it's
Or
mainly
like
to
an
do,
at or a bang or a something.
yeah, import select,
Yeah.
and which is horrible. I mean, it could default back, but I really wouldn't. I'm scared of those corner cases.
Yeah, no, I agree
Because
with
it's
you.
really
Yeah.
weird to bizarrely mesh two.
Yeah, if you
languages.
combine two complex grammars, you're going to have all sorts of strange problems.
Yeah.
And unexpected.
So if anyone has any genius ideas, because we're
I got
6
one.
CS seniors. Yes.
So, I'm thinking as a DBA, you're going to use this command every day, right? And so it's not really sexy, but one of the things that would be really nice is if you had actual like a reference guideline for how to name parameters, so that it was at least a little bit consistent. And then as plugin developers, say you have to use these guidelines so that it, across different engines and databases and.
That's a great point, because I think what I hadn't considered until you just brought that up is that we could just be inviting a morass of horribly named,
Right.
confusing plugins.
Yeah.
And I can see people writing very useful plugins themselves, and there being some sort of a wiki or whatever. People start sharing these different plugins there right for the CLI, it'd be very helpful if there was some set of standards.
Well, I think initially
Yeah,
sort
we
of take the Linux kernel route and just sort of accept patches directly into the tree so they're all distributed, and then people who want their one-off things, it's an option, but try to encourage people to just have it all in the package because it's really cheap to just have another 20-line Python module installed. So
Yeah.
yeah.
One thing to also think about this
We don't want
just from the
to can.
standpoint of like end user acceptance. There's a line you're gonna have to walk as far as like somebody wants to install this and they're a big Java shop and they see that it's Python, they're probably gonna gag. And the problem is that you need to somehow you need to focus a lot when you're trying to like sell people on the usage of it as the tool itself and not necessarily on the fact that it's necessarily Python. Because that way you don't run into the hard language bigots of any given environment. That's one reason why a lot of stuff implemented in C, C++ is we don't need language bigots. It's just like, oh, it's C++, whatever. It's an installed binary, we don't care anymore.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, that seems to bypass the language bigots. But when you get into the Python, Java, whatever else world, so things that you can do is play up a lot more of the functionality of it, and you know, even the simple things, make sure that the dot extension doesn't look like a Python dot extension, look at it as just a name. And it's the funny little stuff like that that just amazingly, if you can bypass that, will completely and utterly just remove all sorts of BS arguments you'll end up hearing.
Why having RPMs and devs and stuff that install the tool into user bin appropriately so that people don't, for the most part, know, like they don't even have to know. Like I imagine that like, you know, half of the Linux admins out there have no idea that Yum is written in Python because there's no need for them to. Like it doesn't, it's not interesting. Like, you know, it's not, it doesn't, they're not required to know that.
And Bazaar, for instance.
And Bazaar, yeah, it's not, it could be written in Python, it could be written in something else.
Actually, everyone knows that because they've gotten stack dumps once in a while.
I would suggest that your general error reporting mechanism should not be Python stack dumps.
Yes, don't follow Bazaar.
At the root, have a wrapper around the main loop that catches an exception and prints out something.
The exception handler differently.
Yeah.
Brian, I don't know how feasible it will be to make extensions not .py. I think that.
Well, for the user bin,
that's actually
in user bin
that
would
in
be
your
fine.
cases you're fine, but like the thing like the actual binary itself should be installed in user bin. It should
Someone
be
using a stock
Yeah.
implementation should be able to use it. And never
Yeah,
load it.
whatever's installed in /lib, obviously
Don't
do it
name it .py.
language dependent, whatever, but whatever's been, what they have to type, make sure they don't have to type .py.
Yeah, you
That's
have to have
really
a dot in one of your systems.
Yes.
But I mean, you think so, but a lot of people blow this, and then they're wondering why their end application is rejected from the from the far side of things. And it's like, well, because people you end up with whatever shop, whatever language, and they just won't want to hear about it being something different.
Well, that's I mean, like that was one of the places where the Java folks had problems getting traction in the Linux world, and then like Eclipse finally came along and it installs like a Linux app rather than installing like a Java app, you know, and then people were like, oh, well this is, yeah, I can just user bin Eclipse, it launches. I didn't have to set a class path that was 12 pages long. I didn't have to know anything about it being Java, and in fact, you can install the GCJ compiled one, which is actually a binary, and it runs the same. You know, so it's like that's really yeah.
I mean, this is even something that's thinking about like pull along for naming convention stuff. Like saying that if you have the command line tools name themselves, drizzle by themselves, or whatever else, that's going to create a certain amount of hesitation from somebody else using another database. Like, well, is it?
I don't use the drizzle client to connect to Postgres.
Or
Actually, speaking of that, if it's going to be generic, are there better names than drizzle?
I think it should be called boots, because you have to wear boots to walk around in drizzle. And
speaking of Northwestern, I don't know if I agree with that. Not that bad.
I came up with some.
Let's
I'll tell
brainstorm
you
some
later.
names.
Well, we have like 2 minutes, so we have to stop soon.